Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we discuss all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.
Welcome back to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I've got a special guest here. I've got Mr. Ray Breed. He is a lecturer at Swinburne in the Faculty of Exercise and Sports Science, or that department specifically. First of all, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Cool. The reason why I've got Ray here because he has extensive experience in the exercise and sports science field, even education. Well, specifically education at the moment, but also in your past history as well. Do you want to give us your little elevator pitch, and we'll get stuck into it?
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Just give us a brief rundown of your history and how did you get into the industry first? That's probably the easiest way. Then kind of give us a brief history of your previous employment, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Look, I trace back to how I get into this industry, and it goes all the way back, I think, to secondary school, and we're talking over 30 years ago now. Had some fantastic PE teachers, brought up in the country, just loved my sport. So I always knew that I wanted to do something in the sporting field. I started off actually training at University of Ballarat, now Federation Uni, as a PE teacher. So I trained there, and then I went off teaching, did the usual overseas trip, taught in London for about 5 years, did some athletics and cricket, competed over there and had a blast. And then after about 5 years of teaching in some pretty challenging schools in London, I thought, okay, I want a little bit of a career change, and I touched base with some of my old lecturers. So it's always good to keep in touch with old lecturers and previous contacts. And then I looked at doing a master's in basically strength and conditioning or some field of exercise science. So I went back to Uni of Ballarat, did a master's in basically in biomechanics and strength and power training. So I did a research study looking at how strength and power development impacts swimmers or youth swimmers. And then while I was there, I got into I started to do a lot of presentations at conferences and things like that. And I did one at a football conference, AFL, and there were a few coaches there, and they said, do you want to come down and do some work with our players and have a look and do some consulting? So I did that for a couple of years in the early days at Hawthorn and then North Melbourne Footy Club. And from that, I got a full-time gig as high-performance manager at North Melbourne Football Club, where I managed the sports science programs, basically overseeing the load and the training of all the players. And then since that, I've had a gig as head of department in a school just down the road, St Leonard's College, head of PE and head of sport. Part of the role there was developing our strength and conditioning programs and our active programs for not just the sporty kids, but also basically getting kids more active. So I really enjoyed that change, going from that elite level back into a school and working with kids. And then more recently, I'm now in my 5th year working at Swinburne University in exercise and sports science. And one of my roles there is actually working with students and developing their coaching skills, particularly in strength and conditioning. So from the start, from school through to where I am now, I think the two underlying messages are just a love and interest in sport and fitness. And secondly, have had some fantastic mentors and guidance along the way. And I think they're two of the critical things that have got me to this point.
Yeah, that's working. Yeah, okay. I think the footy gig would have been very interesting. It's good. What year was that?
Yeah, so I was full-time in that role between 2007 and 2012.
Okay.
Yep. And then I did a couple of years consulting prior to that, 04 to 06, yeah.
Yeah, because it was strength and conditioning was starting to become a thing then as well, back in the early 2000s. I think I was in high school. I don't know. I was just starting high school, I think. I was in high school. Yeah. But that's really cool to see. And then obviously you've did your research piece with youth swimmers. And what was the kind of the key takeaways for that? What was the real research findings?
Yeah, so that was, I'm going to show my age now, that was 98, 99, 2000, around that time. And it was actually before they were using track starts in swimming. So it was predominantly grab starts and then using a swing start for relay changeovers. So we were actually one of the first groups to look at the instrumented block where the swimmer could have their back foot back. And then we looked at comparing the force in all of those, and then we looked at a strength program versus a plyometric program, and if it had any impact on any of the starting variations. And at that time, we actually showed some pretty good evidence that the track start and swimming was starting to prove to be more effective than the traditional grab start. Yeah.
Interesting. And what was the difference between the strength and the plyometrics? Or was there? That's probably the thing.
Yeah, there was. I think it comes down to also the prior strength development of the athletes, but we certainly showed that the specific plyometric program was more useful in terms of improving the distance from the edge of the block to finger point entry, and also time to 5 metres. So the plyometric program had a better effect on those variables.
Interesting, because we do have quite a few swimmers here, and we do implement quite a bit of plyometric work, then Olympic lifting for the training as well. And we've seen some positive outcomes incorporating that. So there you go.
Yeah, awesome.
That's cool. But today, more specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit more about where the industry is going. Obviously, you've been a part of it for the best part of 30 years now, and just kind of saying, obviously, helping the next generation coming through, which we've been doing for the last 5 years over at Swinburne, and obviously that we've had interns over the last 3 years since pretty much from operation. Where do you see the industry kind of moving forward in terms of, the strength and conditioning, and do you see more niches kind of breaking out, or where do you see the general trend going?
I think one of the issues that we've seen over the last 4 to 5 years in particular is that overlap between, PT, S&C, exercise science, even some overlap with EP, and so on. And it's really clearly identifying what each of the roles are for each of the different particular industries. I think the students themselves can often be quite confused as well as to the differences. And I think, like you alluded to, I think what we're going to find is, as you said, some more niche areas in terms of specific S&C. We've already seen it in terms of tactical, S&C specific for the Army, Navy, Police.
Fireys,
Yeah. So I think we're going to see a little bit more of that. At the moment, probably the last 12 to 24 months, we've also seen a specific group together in terms of S&C specific for youth athletes and the concept of long-term athlete development. So I can see that sort of coming out into another niche area. But again, how we sort of differentiate the different industries, with PT, say a Cert 3 and 4, always a role. I mean, we see them predominantly going into larger commercial gyms. S&C coaches, I mean, technically you can do a level 1 ASCA SNC. My understanding is with just a bit of experience. So I think it's going to also become a little bit more heavily regulated in terms of what a coach requires in order to do what specific roles. And I think we've seen ESSA, Exercise Sports Science Australia, really clamp down on that in the last 4 to 5 years in terms of trying to clearly define people's roles. But like you alluded to, I think we are going to see a bit more specialisation of S&C coaches into particular fields and areas. The one area I see is probably the biggest growth area at the moment is in schools, particularly with the funding going into schools from from what was the AIS, and also that big push for increasing students' physical activity. The research and results coming out at the moment is not pleasing to read in terms of the overall physical activity of kids.
The current standards.
Yeah. So I see the schools, being really key players. And look, it wouldn't surprise me to see, some sort of specialised physical activity centre, whether that be a gym with weights or particularly for community and kids outside of the PE and organised situation. Pretty much every school, I think, will have something like that in a few years' time.
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time over in the US. So I went to the University of Wisconsin. I might have told this story a couple of times. But when I was going in the lead up of going there, I tried to do as much research as I could in terms of understanding like the high school system. But how do they transition to college as well? Yep. What I had noticed is even some of the state schools there had some sort of funding in order for a gymnasium there. And then they would have like a dedicated full-time strength coach or a part-timer, someone who would run the facility essentially and just basically have supervised hours and follow some level of a structured program. And usually they would kind of liaise with the sports. Now, their sporting system's a little bit different to the way we operate in Australia. Like we have more clubs, I guess, more the Catholic and private schools or independent schools, they'll have their own program and they'll have an S&C coach because usually they can actually self-fund it in that sense. And what you tend to see is more positive outcomes in terms of buying with the schools. But then, because one of my housemates was actually working when I was over there, he was interning with me, but they had also picked up a job working at a high school as well. And he really particularly enjoyed it, working with I think it was the female basketball and volleyball programs there on a part-time basis. And then what the school had done is actually had different S&C coaches run different programs, but they also allowed the kids to come in and do like almost their own thing in the weight gym as well, whether it's after school, before school, or even at lunchtime as well. I personally think I would have loved to have done something more like that if there was like a facility like similar to this. Doesn't have to be huge or massive or anything like that. Just to have some access and support, because I think we're going to get more positive outcomes, not from a performance perspective as such, but more from a societal perspective. Like obesity rates will start to drop, or childhood obesity. Grades will start to improve. We see that with a lot of kids here. They actually start training, and the nutrition starts to improve as well. It's like, I'm getting results from the weights. Like, what else can I do? I can eat better. So we see positive changes in that side, and there's more buy-in from the parents, because the parents see the kids performing better, feeling better grades. I'm like, what other parent doesn't want that?
For sure.
Essentially. But then there's a few schools that we work with. Some of the students go to different schools around here, and we tend to see programs like that as well, that they're starting to pop up and propagate throughout. And the unfortunate thing is, like, when the kids get older, PE becomes less of a importance, or physical activity becomes less important, more focus on academics, whether it's year 11, year 12, where the grades become more important. So there tends to be a shift in priority, but it's more about that. Can you transition them from year 7, 8, 9 and actually propagate their willingness to be in the gym? Transition it to 10, 11, and 12, when it's more just about that maintenance, where they can help assist them with their grades, physical, mental well-being. Then by the time they leave school, then it's just become a normal fixture of their life.
Yeah, you're seeing, I think we've seen a lot of that development in schools. In the last 5 to 10 years, at the school I worked with not far from here, part of the role was to get the kids more active, and we had some programs specifically for year 11s and 12s. They'd come down, get on the exercise bikes while they got their study notes, those sorts of things. But you alluded to a point which I think is critical, and that is that sometimes students at that age, and also the parents, think that doing more is better. In other words, doing 8 hours study a day at the cost of doing an hour's exercise is better than 6 hours study and an hour of exercise, for example. So it's certainly a challenge that faces all of us at the moment, to be able to educate students and also parents on the benefits of activity, and how losing an hour of study a day can actually be a benefit to the student, rather than actually a hindrance in terms of their overall results. So, Yes, I think schools are doing some pretty good stuff at the moment, and I think it's just going to become more and more and become much more formalised in schools.
Yeah, and eventually it will be commonplace. It'll probably take another 5 to 10 years to become just like standardised across all schools. I think it would actually be a good research area as well to actually see, when programs are implemented, to see what are the actual outcomes. Do we see changes in grades, behaviour issues, what's the buy-in with the school? With a lot of programs as well, like we see a lot of school programs around here. The kids are just like, when they have like the swimming carnivals against other schools, there's just a massive buy-in to the school. So we tend to see more positive outcomes in that sense. But I know, like I said before, if I would have used it completely. It's good. I think the other issue is the insurance side now, because the old it's like, we shouldn't do strength training until they're 16, whole dogma, I guess, on wives' tale, had taken traction, and I don't know where it kind of propagated from, but it's funny because there's been a lot of research over the last 20, 30 years to actually say that out of all the sports you can think of, like 20 or 30 different sports, it's actually the safest one of the lot. So to me, it's quite interesting to see like, strength training is dangerous, but we eliminate a lot of variables that potentially could make it dangerous. Yeah,
it's a good point you make. I liken it back to anything can be dangerous if it's instructed poorly, and I think that's the sort of difference. There was obviously some cases of children getting injured, adolescents getting injured, but it's usually as a result of not following solid principles and foundations of exercise and
or rules. We just call them rules, essentially.
Okay, yeah, basically, and we all know that we don't have to be a genius to say if a 12-year-old's never done any strength work before, and you try and load them up and do 4 RM type exercise, they're going to be at a higher risk of injury. Absolutely, but again, if we follow these simple rules, then it's a very safe and I think an essential part of a youth development. And we've seen the research that's in a lot of these long-term athlete development models, which shows that is sort of between the ages of 6 and 9 are actual crucial years for that first level of development through aerobic, anaerobic, general strength and those sorts of things. So I think the underlying message is that strength training is not bad for children and adolescents unless it's taught really poorly. So
it's like chocolate's not bad unless you eat a shitload of it.
Along that, basically.
Because we've discussed it numerous times, because our youngest member is 10 years old, actually, and he comes in at 6 in the morning, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know, very impressive. He loves coming in. Yeah. So, and one of the coaches, Dave, he looks after him primarily. He writes up, he sets up like a basic program. It doesn't have to be like as structured as like doing like a 3x12 or something like that for a junior athlete, or even just a junior who plays basketball at a club level. He just enjoys it, because then we can kind of borderline gamify it for him as well. It's like, all right, you need to say we set the basketball ring at a certain height. Yep. You have to try and touch the net 6 times, or you have to push the sled from A to B within 5 seconds or something like that. Yeah. So we provide these challenges, and then once they accomplish these challenges, then it's that sense of achievement that they get from it, and then create more buy-in in order to continue on with that. Then the idea is, as they start to get more mature, they'll actually start to feel and notice the physiological changes from the strength training or from the training in general. And then there's going to be they've created that habit in order, then we can just continue as well.
And you're spot on. Like, particularly, I think intrinsic motivation and developing that when a child's young, or like you're saying, even as young as 6. But probably 10, 11, 12 is sort of where I started to see the students get interested in that area and want to come down to the gym. And you're absolutely right. Instead of giving them those sort of traditional exercises, give them little challenges, start to improve their motivation so that they've got that want to keep coming back before, you know, they undertake that more serious and higher level form of training. And enjoyment, I think, is just the critical thing in any level of coaching.
You have just listened to the Inner Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with the release of weekly episodes. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get great tips on all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.